This presentation was recorded on Menang Noongar Budja, and I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land, the Menang people of the Noongar Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, to the diversity of First Nations people, and to their ongoing culture and connection to Budja. They were the first in this country to hold information and privacy sacred. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The content that follows is based on the presenter's experience and understanding, and this video does not constitute legal advice. Organisations that are subject to the Australian privacy principles are encouraged to seek appropriate legal advice to understand their obligations and ensure adherence. Welcome to this video, part 2 of the eSafety for Non-Profit series. In this video, we will be talking about the types of risks associated with the management of information, leaks, attacks, and exfiltration. Before we discuss the methods by which data might be stolen, leaked, or mishandled, it is worth considering briefly why we want to protect that data. The most obvious answer for most organisations is that it's the law. The Australian Privacy Act of 1988 sets out the civil penalties the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner can levy against individuals and corporations for negligent or willful breaches of privacy. Beyond the law, however, is the ethical responsibility for those who have access to information about another individual to protect that information. In a 2023 study, the Information Commissioner found that 76% of people whose information was part of a breach suffered harm because of it. People have had lives ruined because of mishandling of data. As someone given the responsibility for that data, it should be your priority to ensure it remains safe. So who are we protecting that data from? There are a number of obvious answers: scammers, spammers, organised criminals, and the dark web. However, privacy breaches are also often committed by, or profited from, by groups within our society that we would consider less of a menace, such as marketers, researchers, governments and law enforcement agencies. These groups are less likely to actively break the law in order to obtain private information, but all of them have taken advantage of leaked data in the past. The hacker in popular media is a figure shrouded in mystery, using high-powered computing equipment to break complicated codes from darkened rooms filled with blinking lights. The reality, however, is often much more mundane. Outside of Hollywood, cybercriminals generally do not fit any particular stereotype. They can work alone, in small teams, or large state-operated ventures. They are often more likely to favour social attacks than technical ones, for example, phishing scams. They are often opportunistic, looking for easy targets with low risk, and spreading their efforts across wide fronts in order to catch as many people as possible. Some larger scam rings even employ casual or gig workers to operate call centres, and these workers may have no technical background whatsoever. The World Cybercrime Index identified that the most significant source of cybercriminals as of 2024 is Russia, closely followed by Ukraine, China, the USA, and Nigeria. Any discussion of cybercrime will invariably include mention of the dark web. So what is it? Typically, when discussing the web, which is the browsable public-facing side of the larger internet, we are concerned with the surface web. These are the websites that you can access with a standard web browser, are able to be found by search engines such as Google or DuckDuckGo, and are increasingly based around commercial content. In Australia, your access to the web may also be logged by your ISP as part of the Australian Government's mandatory data retention laws, and websites operating in Australia will typically adhere to Australian law. The deep web is an unofficial term for the less frequented corners of the web. Websites considered to be part of the deep web are still usable by standard web browsers, but are less likely to be found by a simple web search and may be passed by word of mouth or use a specialist search engine, for example, an archive search. The deep web tends to be information rich rather than commercial and is often quoted as containing up to 96% of the web's content. Deep web properties are still largely legally abiding, however, and your access of them is monitorable, just as with the surface web. The dark web, or darknet, is an entirely different phenomenon. To access the dark web typically means using a specialist gateway or tool that unlocks access, for example Tor or some VPN tools. The dark web is unlikely to be signposted, and search engines are rare and likely to be out of date, so knowledge of how to navigate it is often passed within trusted groups. There is no requirement for information on the dark web to be malicious, unethical, or illegal, and it can often be a way to bypass censorship in countries with strict rules such as China. However, the fact that it is hard to monitor and control means that it has largely become associated with illegal activity. One such illegal activity, and the one which mainly concerns us in this video, is the sale of information. Data from breaches, leaks, or attacks will often be found for sale on marketplaces such as the Silk Road or the Empire Market, both of which have been shut down by authorities. Transactions are often conducted in cyber currencies such as Bitcoin, which have become the de facto currency in the dark web and are harder to trace. In 2023, prices for leaked information were suggested to be as low as $100 for online banking credentials. A working stolen credit card could be worth as little as $10. Access to a Netflix or Facebook account would sell for $25. In May 2023, an Australian e-script company called MediSecure revealed that the data of 12.9 million Australians was stolen. This data appeared on the dark web and was sold by the attacker for $50,000. There are a number of methods by which data breaches can occur. This can include things such as accidental leaks, intentional exfiltration, external attacks, internal mishandling, and supply chain and third-party issues. By far, the most likely cause for a data breach event in any organisation is an accidental leak. These typically do not involve malicious actors, but can include things such as privilege mistakes. For example, when a volunteer or employee is allowed access to information that their role does not require. It can also include a lack of obfuscation, for example, when a report is made public without removing personally identifiable information. It can include genuine mistakes, for example, sending an email to a large group of people and putting those names in CC, not BCC, which would constitute leaking each of those email addresses. Finally, an accidental leak might also encompass a lack of care. For example, dumping a large number of files into a recycling bin without first checking if they contain personally identifiable information. In contrast to an accidental leak, intentional exfiltration is an action by an internal agent to maliciously leak data from an organisation. Some examples of this may include an insider threat, for example, an employee being blackmailed or bribed to allow access to sensitive information. It may include malicious activities such as a disgruntled employee giving confidential information to the press, or it may involve personal gain, such as an employee or volunteer directly selling information to a competitor. External attacks are those that involve another entity attempting to take information from your organisation by subterfuge or by force, and can take one of a number of forms. For example, the poster child for a technical attack would likely be that of a virus, which may be either targeted at an organisation or simply a part of a more widespread infection. Most modern viruses include a remote access component to allow an attacker past your defences, or may simply send the attacker any information they can find. An exploit attack uses a weakness in your organisation to gain unauthorised access to information. Generally, this refers to finding problems with computer systems that have not yet been fixed and taking advantage of them. However, exploits can also be found in policies and procedures, making non-computer information systems vulnerable as well. A credential attack is a specific sort of exploit which leapfrogs from another data breach by taking advantage of people reusing passwords with multiple services. For example, in 2017, the genealogy website MyHeritage suffered a data breach which included password data. If an employee had signed up to MyHeritage with a work email address and reused the same password, then an attacker could quickly access that employee's email account. By far, the most common type of external attack is a social engineering attack. These sorts of attacks are a way of exploiting the weaknesses of the humans in the chain, using our assumptions and prejudices against us. Here is an example of a possible social engineering attack. An attacker finds the name of a volunteer within your organisation from your newsletter and finds their personal email address by searching their details on the web. He calls their email provider and convinces them to reset the volunteer's password. Once they have access to the user's personal email account, they find a past email from your organisation's CFO. This gives the attacker the CFO's name, email, and business mobile number, which are found on their email signature. The attacker calls the mobile of the CFO, claiming to be from your IT team, and while on the phone, triggers a reset of the CFO's password. This causes a code to be sent to the CFO's mobile, but the attacker convinces the CFO to read it out to identify themselves. The attacker is then free to access the CFO's work account, which includes financial information on all of the organisation's employees. A more insidious form of data breach is the misuse or mishandling of information. This is any situation whereby the information your organisation holds is incorrectly used or handled. This may not involve information leaving your organisation. For example, this might include inappropriate usage of information, where the original use case for the collection of the information doesn't match its eventual use. In this situation, the subject of the information may not be aware of the new way their information is being handled. Unauthorised sharing, for example, might be as simple as an employee not realising another person should not have access to certain information, or could conceivably encompass situations such as gossiping or workplace bullying. Finally, organisations who do not correctly interpret or follow data handling policies are, unsurprisingly, mishandling that information. This can include a failure to dispose of information that it is no longer allowed to retain. Finally, supply chain and third-party risks are those inherent to involving other vendors or data handling entities in your own information management processes. For example, a vendor that provides you a service such as delivery would need a certain amount of the information you hold in order to fulfill that service, the name and address of the customer, and potentially the nature of the delivery. Alternatively, you may engage a data holding service to directly handle electronic or physical records. In each of these cases, a breach within your supply chain risks a leak of your organisation's data. The nature of these breaches will become relevant in the next video, where we will look at the expectations of your organisation's information handling under the Australian Privacy Principles.